bilateral, really medially impacted earwax and keratin. The original lawyer just really struggled because of the depth. It was quite deep, and they asked the patient to contact myself, which is very kind of them. And you can just see by the colour of this wax and keratin, it's been in there for a while, it's oxidised, so it's turned a really dark brown, almost a jet black in appearance. And we're slowly but surely extracting this using microsuction. We're using a standard Zollner suction probe, which has got an internal lumen of 2 millimeters, so that's the internal diameter. You can see the eardrum there. Now, mid-canal, just here, the ear canal does narrow somewhat and it protrudes back outwards. There's a possible reason why the patient's getting a buildup of wax, so there's skin that's lining the ear canal as it's dying and shedding and trying to naturally migrate out of the ear in a conveyor belt motion. It's getting trapped in the midpoint of the canal because there's a bit of a narrowing. There's some non-occluding, non-significant sticky keratin wax on the posterior, so the back part of the ear canal, quite deep. Just going to gently hover over that with the suction probe without trying to make contact with the canal wall, because the inner 2/3 of the ear canal is very sensitive. It's the bony part of the ear. The outer third is the cartilaginous portion. So that's more flexible, it's less rigid and it's more flexible. So we can apply a bit more pressure there. Nonetheless, the patient's symptoms are completely alleviated. You can see the eardrum, the sound's travelling through. I think I'm going to attach a fine end suction gauge here now, just to see if I can peel it off. Because the patient was still, I gave it a go. Otherwise, when I'm training my clear wax delegates, I would just ask them to leave that until they get a bit more skilled and experienced. You don't want to try and remove pieces of wax and skin that's not going to aid the patient in terms of their hearing unnecessarily, and then accidentally cause trauma by grazing the canal or bruising it. In my case, because I'm a bit more skilled and experienced now, I'm more than happy to see if we can peel it. But even sometimes myself, I kind of think to myself, well, just leave it as it is now. Sometimes less is more. So you can see the narrowing here. A bit of skin at the top of the ear canal. I was going to gently peel that away as well. So that's the patient's eardrum. Probably a slight attic retraction. So the top part of the eardrum slightly wrapped around the hammer bone, the top part of the hammer bone, and that's due to eustachian tube dysfunction. We know the patient has got a history of eustachian tube dysfunction, and that'll become more evident when you watch the second right ear procedure. The patient has had a heel perforation due to a middle ear infection on that side, and there's a bit of scar tissue there as well. So eustachian tube dysfunction is a narrow tube behind the eardrum that connects to the back of the nose, and it's called the eustachian tube. The cavity behind the eardrum, called the middle ear, that should be air-filled, and the air pressure behind the eardrum should be the same, equal to the atmospheric air pressure. And when the air pressure either side of the eardrum is the same, when it's equal, that's when our eardrum is most mobile and compliant. That's when we hear most efficiently and effectively. So it's the job of the eustachian tube to equalise the air pressure behind the eardrum in the middle ear. The eustachian tube is typically closed, and during brief moments of yawning, swallowing, eating, chewing, it momentarily opens at the back of the nose, and that allows air to either enter or to escape to equalise the pressure. However, if that eustachian tube gets blocked, it creates negative pressure behind the eardrum. You can see the heel perforation there, bottom right of the eardrum, the thinning of the eardrum. So when there's negative pressure behind the eardrum, it's a bit like when you're on an aeroplane, your eardrum gets sucked in. And think about the eardrum like a piece of cling film. It can then wrap against the hammer bone, which is the first of the three bones. The hammer bone, the medical term is called the malleus. The eustachian tube is also a drain pipe, so any secretions, any fluid behind the eardrum that would typically drain out of the eustachian tube can no longer escape. So it's like a blocked drain pipe in your kitchen. Fluid builds up behind the eardrum. Eventually that fluid, if it can't drain, will get infected. It'll become thick, viscous in consistency, hence the term glue ear. This glue ear eventually has to go somewhere, and it's almost like a water balloon. There's too much fluid behind the eardrum, it will just perforate through, and that's what's happened in this patient's right ear. You can see bottom right, that's the heel perforation. You can see the scar tissue either side. This is the dead wax and skin I removed from both ears. You can just see how dark it is, how oxidised it is, so we know it's been there for a while. And you'll have a close-up view of one of the larger pieces. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video.